It's in the Fox 9 newsroom in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as we are now preparing our live stream coverage for day 8 of the manslaughter trial of Kim Potter for the traffic stop death of Daunte Wright from April 11th of this year. Of course, Potter shot and killed Wright during that traffic stop after she intended to pull her taser but pulled her gun instead. She has always pleaded not guilty in this case, maintained her innocence because it was, in her words, an accident. Her attorneys have promised for weeks now that we would hear from Kim Potter herself, that she has a story to tell. Today is her day to tell that story. The prosecution rested its case yesterday. Kim Potter's defense called their first 6 witnesses, 3 of which were character references. Today, we're expecting 2 witnesses, of course, another expert witness on what's called action error, and Potter herself. So let's begin right there and bring in my colleague Paul Bloom, who's been covering this trial from the beginning. Kim Potter takes the stand today, Paul, and likely she will become the star in her own defense, won't she?
Absolutely, Tim. So far, we've heard from about 30 witnesses in the case. We are 8 months removed from the traffic stop. Today, Kim Potter steps up onto that witness stand in front of this jury, most importantly, but also because of cameras in the courtroom, sort of a national television audience, if you will, and she will tell her story. Is she believable? Is she likable? Is she relatable? Does she engage this jury? She needs to tell this jury what she saw. Did she see Sergeant Johnson in the vehicle? Why did she want to pull out her taser? And how, in that moment of truth, a 25-plus year law enforcement career, trained on everything, knowing the difference between her gun and her taser, how does she get that wrong and pull out the gun? Obviously, the newest wrinkle thrown into this trial just a week ago is this idea that she was justified in shooting a fleeing Daunte Wright. How does that change her story as she gets up on the stand? No doubt she's been coached by her attorneys. This case comes down to what Kim Potter says over these next few hours.
Let's bring in our trial attorney right now, Debbie Lang, who is joining us. And Debbie, when it all comes down to this today, it really relies on her own credibility on the stand. She really needs to make the jury believe her, don't they?
Absolutely. She's going to take some punches. She's going to have to accept those facts that she simply can't deny. So we're going to hear her acknowledging the differences between the taser and a gun. She can't deny that. We're going to hear her admit her training. She's going to admit knowing the policy of the law of the police department. And then what we're going to hear is that she made a mistake. So we're going to hear her talk about what she saw, what she heard, what she felt, what she was thinking during those critical seconds before she pulled the trigger. And that testimony is key here. And the defense, they're going to want the jury to believe her, and they're going to want the jury to like her. I do expect her to be very emotional, just as she was on that video. And as we've seen throughout the trial, she appears to be someone who does wear her heart on her sleeve a bit.
You've been involved in a lot of trials yourself, and when you and other attorneys interview jurors afterwards, after a case is over with, what's the feedback that you get? What are the jurors looking for when a defendant takes the stand in their own defense?
I think, Tim, first of all, the question that jurors always have is, will that defendant take the stand? And so here we know that she's going to, and the jurors were promised that early. They were promised that during jury selection. And so that is something that they haven't been wondering. So as they've been hearing the testimony throughout these last 2 weeks, there's no doubt in my mind they have been wondering, what about Kim Potter? Does she know that? Would she agree with that? Would she not? And so here, they're going to be able to hear it from Kim Potter. And afterwards, we oftentimes hear from jurors concerns about demeanor and how the defendant presents. And again, here, I think Kim Potter will likely present as likable. Her attorneys would certainly have coached her to look at the jury, to have that conversation with them, to try to bring them in, to not lose them as some other witnesses have. We've heard that some jurors have been yawning and one nodded off during some testimony. So it's going to be important for her to capture their attention and then to keep it. And I think she'll be able to do that.
And Debbie, Paul Bloom back in the conversation here. Talk to me about the emotion here. We've seen Kimberly Potter break down over at her defense table, just watching back the video of the shooting, and particularly the aftermath where she basically is uncontrollable. Her fellow officers so worried they end up disarming her, taking away her live rounds out of the firearm on her holster because they're worried she's going to harm herself. She's been at times very hard to control her emotions at defense table. How important is it that she gets back in check to get up on that witness stand? I know you want her to show emotion, but she also has to be in control of herself, right, as she retells this story. And I would just point out to our viewers yesterday, we understand her elderly mother was in that courtroom. It's a kind of a unique courtroom during pandemic times, limited seating. There's not a big gallery that you might see in a different type of situation where a witness is telling, basically the story of their life with their fate on the line. But her mom's in that courtroom. Her husband's in that courtroom. Daunte Wright's family is in that courtroom and back. How does she keep her emotions in check? But again, show a little bit, open up to this jury.
She definitely would have practiced her testimony with her defense team. So they would have practiced both the direct examination, which is going to be more narrative. Those are the open-ended questions where Kim Potter is going to be able to tell her story more. But they also would have practiced with her the cross-examination, which is the rapid-fire questions from the other side. So here from the prosecution. And those are the questions that are typically more yes or no in nature. Without a doubt, she's going to be emotional at some point. And so it's going to be a matter of her being able to maintain her composure, to get back, stay focused. We saw yesterday that an officer that she worked with, Officer Fricky, I believe, Colleen Fricky, we saw that Officer Fricky was emotional when talking about Kim Potter and what had happened. And so the reality is, although these officers, they are seen as their uniform and their badge, they are also humans underneath. And so that is something that the defense is going to want the jury to remember. And the reality is humans make mistakes. And that's their theory here, is that Kim Potter made a mistake on that day when she shot Daunte Wright.
Debbie, Tim Blotz here. We have just about 30 more seconds before we join our coverage at the top of the hour on Fox 9. But the state believes in its case, and they believe that they've proved it so far. But is there a risk in cross-examination of Kim Potter today of becoming too aggressive and that coming off negatively to the jury?
Risk, but this is the defendant in the case. And so this is different than cross-examining an alleged victim or an independent witness. So they're going to go after her hard, but they definitely
Deb, my apologies, Deb. I'm going to have to wrap you right there. We are going to take a quick break to our streaming audience here and then come right back. Well, good morning, everyone. Tim Blotz here in the Fox 9 newsroom, where we are breaking in to give you special coverage this morning of the trial of the state of Minnesota versus Kim Potter. This is the former Brooklyn Park police officer who's charged with 2 counts of manslaughter in the death of Daunte Wright from that traffic stop on April 11th earlier this year. Throughout this trial, Kim Potter and her attorneys have promised that we would all hear her story, that the jury, most importantly, the jury would hear her story, that she would testify in her own defense. This is that moment. She is expected to take the stand today. Judge Regina Chu is about to start court session, and when she approaches the bench, we will join in court the live stream coverage live. But for the moment, let's bring in Paul Bloom and attorney Debbie Lang. And Paul, let's start with you, because the outcome of this trial will very likely hinge on what Kim Potter says today.
Absolutely, Tim. We've heard from some 30 witnesses already in this trial, testimony a week and a half now into the trial, the manslaughter trial against Kim Potter. But this is the star witness. This case comes down to what Kim Potter says. Does this jury believe her? What does she see? And also, how does she explain now this situation? She has maintained it is this accident, that she meant to pull the taser, not the gun, but she pulls the gun. And now all of a sudden, because of the way testimony has come in, the gun would be an authorized weapon. So how she does that delicate dance, I will absolutely be watching. The one other thing I've maintained all along since we started seeing this body camera footage from the scene, she says in the immediate aftermath, "I am going to prison," seeming to indicate she felt in the moment she did something so wrong that she would end up here and now telling her story. Why did she utter those words in the immediate aftermath? How she explains that away, must-see TV, no doubt.
All right, I want to bring in Debbie Lang from Hallberg Criminal Defense, who's been one of our legal analysts throughout this trial. And Debbie, I think it's important to step back here and remind our viewers what Kim Potter is charged with. It's first and second-degree manslaughter. Could you go over those charges for us, please?
And Tim, before you go, I just would point out that Judge Chu has taken her place on the bench.
We are going to join the courtroom right now.
Ready for the jury. Okay, thank you, Deputy. Okay, please be seated. Good morning, members of the jury. Okay, is the defense prepared to call its next witness?
We call Dr. Lawrence Miller.
Okay, please come forward, Dr. Miller. And would you please stand behind the witness chair? Now raise your right hand, please. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer questions pertaining to this case?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Good morning, Judge.
And you can remove your mask. And would you please state your full name and spell it?
Lawrence Miller, Laurence, Miller, Miller.
Okay. Dr. Miller, a couple things to keep in mind when you're testifying. The court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. So only one person can talk at a time. Please wait till the question is finished before you answer. And the lawyers have been instructed that they should not ask another question until you finish your answer. You have to answer with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh or uh-uh. If an objection is made, please stop talking immediately and do not answer the question unless I tell you to. And then finally, if you need clarification of a question, please don't hesitate to let the lawyer know. Okay?
I understand.
Okay. Mr. Ng?
Dr. Miller, how old a man are you?
Excuse me?
How old are you?
70 years old.
No, how old are you?
How am I? A little cold, but fine.
No, how old are you?
70.
Okay. And where did you fly in from to be here?
I flew in from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
You have an accent. Where did you grow up initially?
I grew up in New York, in the New York area, for the first 38 years of my life, and was educated in New York.
Okay. Let's start with your education. Do you have a college degree?
Yes, I do.
Tell us about that.
Well, I have a bachelor's degree from Queens College of the City University of New York.
What was the major?
Psychology.
Did you go on to an advanced degree beyond a BA?
Beyond the BA, I obtained a master's degree from that same college in neuroscience and experimental neurophysiology.
What year was that, if you recall?
That was 1978.
Did you go further beyond your master's degree to get a PhD?
Yes, I obtained my PhD from City College of the City University of New York in 1988.
What was your emphasis for your PhD?
Clinical neuropsychology.
What was the title of your thesis?
I did my dissertation on neuropsychological functioning, brain functioning in psychopaths.
Are you a psychologist?
Yes.
What does a psychologist do?
Psychologist is a doctoral level professional who specializes in the evaluation and treatment of mental disorders, and in some cases mental disorders caused by problems in brain functioning and neuropsychological impairment.
And how long have you been in the practice of being a psychologist?
Well, I've been licensed as a psychologist in independent practice since 1990, as a trainee, probably 6 to 8 years prior to that.
Do you have specialties in your practice as a psychologist?
That's correct.
Do you have specialties?
Yes.
Tell us what they are.
Well, one specialty is clinical psychology, which is what most people think of psychologists doing, which is evaluating and treating patients for various problems, family matters, adults, children.
Are you also a forensic psychologist?
That's correct. The forensic psychology aspect deals with matters of psychology as applied to law, civil cases involving personal injury, workers' compensation cases, criminal law in terms of evaluation for competency to stand trial, insanity defenses, prediction of dangerousness, and so on.
Do you also practice neuropsychology?
Neuropsychology is the direct application of brain science to behavioral disorders, and it ranges everything from dealing with children with learning disorders all the way up through older folks with various types of dementia.
Do you also practice in the area of police psychology?
Well, police psychology is kind of a hybrid specialty between organizational psychology, clinical psychology, and forensic psychology. And there you apply behavioral science to various aspects of law enforcement. It's kind of broad. It can deal with anything from hostage negotiation, de-escalation training, stress management, but also dealing with officer-involved shootings and the psychological factors that can both influence a shooting incident and the effects of that shooting on everyone concerned.
How long have you practiced police psychology?
Approximately 20 to 25 years.
In the course of your career, have you published?
Yes.
How many books have you written?
I think it's about 12 at this point.
Showing you the practical police psychology. Is this one of your books, Professor?
Yes, it is.
Doctor? What's this book about?
That basically instructs officers on managing their stress related to the profession of policing, but also in crisis management, dealing with various types of crisis situations, and specifically ways of de-escalating in order to avoid use of force. Also dealing with such topics as police officer suicide, critical incident stress, hostage negotiation, and other special unit policing.
This was recently published.
Excuse me?
Well, this was recently published.
That book goes back to 2006.
Okay. How about this one, Psychology of Police Deadly Force Encounters? Did you write this one too?
Yes.
This is the newer book.
That was, I believe, published in 2020, and that deals more in a more focused way with the psychology of police shootings themselves.
How many books, in addition to this, have you written? I may have asked, but I want to ask again.
I think 10 other books on various topics.
Have you also published articles in professional and peer-reviewed journals?
Yes.
What's a peer-reviewed journal, by the way?
A peer-reviewed article is an article that has been evaluated by one's professional peers. In other words, it's evaluated for its adherence to scientific principles, its coverage of the literature, and its credibility as it relates to other aspects of the field.
Have you also published articles in non-peer review magazines and journals?
Well, I like to write for both a professional audience, but I think psychology needs to be known outside the field, so I do try to write for a popular audience. I've written online articles, magazine articles, and so on.
Okay. Have you taught as well?
Yes.
Where are you teaching now?
Well, currently I'm teaching at Florida Atlantic University.
What courses are you teaching there?
I teach a course in clinical psychology, a course in neuropsychology, a course in psychology and law, and a course in police psychology.
Are you a full-time professor there or an adjunct?
I'm an adjunct.
Okay. And in your working life, what else do you do besides teach then? Practice? You engage in your practice as a psychologist?
I have my clinical practice. I have my forensic work where I work with the various civil and criminal courts in various types of cases, brain injury cases, criminal cases, personal injury cases. I also on occasion conduct seminars for various groups, and these can be criminal justice people or mental health people on various topics relating to psychology and the law. And then I have my special cases that I do, which is what brings me here today.
Okay. We could go for another hour on all the articles you've written, but they are included in your CV, which is Defense Exhibit 1000. Is that right?
Yes.
Offer 1000.
The objection to Exhibit 1000.
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay.
The objection is overruled, and the exhibit will be received into evidence.
Now you were approached by the defense to assist us in certain concepts called action error and slip and capture error. Did we retain you to assist us?
Yes.
How much did you charge us?
My flat fee for my total involvement in this case was $30,000.
Okay, and that includes interviews with the defense, the review of the interviews with others, the review of the file, writing a report, coming here today.
It includes everything that I've done for this case, from the beginning consultation with the attorneys through reviewing records, clinical interviews of relevant personnel, producing a written report, consultations with the attorneys, preparing for testimony, and of course getting on the plane and coming here today.
And is it your practice to charge flat fees? Is that what you've established in terms of your fee schedule?
Different experts do it in different ways. Some like to charge by the hour and submit a very detailed invoice for time spent and materials used. I've been doing forensic psychology in one form or another for about a quarter of a century, and I found it simply more efficient to sort of prorate what a typical case will involve, the number of hours it typically takes, and then just base a flat fee on that instead of submitting a 20-page itemized invoice.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to ask you about some topics, and then we'll get to action errors and slip and capture in a moment. But let's start with how skills and knowledge is learned, how memories are formed. Can you help us with that? What are the stages of learning and memory?
We like to believe that we're always in control of our actions, but most of what we do on a daily basis really occurs on an automatic level. And in fact, we couldn't function if that weren't the case. Think about everything you simply did today just to prepare to come here, all the little actions you took in preparations in the morning. If you had to think and deliberate about each thing you did, you'd trip over your own mental feet. So much of what we do, both in personal life and in terms of the skills we perform, whatever those skills are in a profession we may have, is something that achieves a certain automaticity. We sort of go on automatic. Think about driving a car. The first time you learn to drive a car, it seemed like an impossible task. Now you can do it literally unconscious, an unconscious basis and think about other things, talk to people in the car, and so on. And so in order for that to happen, that information has to get into your brain.
And is there a term in your field called input?
Well, one of the stages of memory is input. In other words, you have to be able to pay attention to something sufficiently for it to get into the brain in the first place. If you're not attending to it, if you don't see it or hear it or perceive it, then you're not going to be able to recall it later, not because you can't recall it, but because it didn't get there in the first place.
Is there another term in your field called consolidation?
The interesting thing about the way the brain processes memory is it's an ongoing process. What we're speaking about now is still in the process of being formatted. And if something were to happen to interrupt that process, you may not recall what I said a few seconds ago. But as time proceeds, structures in the brain format that memory and they begin to place it in different relevant storage areas in the brain. And this is something that goes on and on and on, literally throughout your life. Every time you encounter something that's similar to a previous memory, it interlinks with that, it forms synapses, and so what you get is this kind of holistic gestalt of knowledge that you call upon when you need it.
And how are memories retrieved then? I mean, you've talked about input, consolidation, storing the memories. How are they retrieved?
All the storage in the world is not going to do much good if you can't get the memory when you want it. And it's quite amazing, if I were to ask you some specific questions, how you could come up with the answer almost instantaneously, considering the billions of bits of information that you have. So there are structures in the brain that then go back, search the memory, and pick out those specific instances that you want to recall, whether it's knowledge memory in terms of a topic that you want to expound about, or if it's a skill that has to be done quickly, efficiently, instantaneously, without thinking. And again, that's why most of what people do on a skilled basis, they do on an automatic level and use the other parts of their brain when an unusual circumstance presents itself.
Is there a term that you've come to know in your field called multiple representation?
And when we say storage in the brain, it's not like there's a certain file cabinet for each individual memory.